What if one of the most feared monsters in Greek mythology was never a monster at all? What if Medusa and her sisters weren't villains but guardians placed at the edge of the world, meant to protect sacred boundaries rather than terrorize humanity? For centuries we've been told a story of heroes and monsters. But myths are written by those who survive them. Today we're looking deeper, beyond the snakes and the stone, to uncover a forgotten truth about the Gorgons and the power they guarded. Thank you for being here and for taking this journey into myth with me. Let's begin. Monsters are made, not born. The first lie Elias learned was that pain had a purpose. He was 6 when his father said it, kneeling to inspect a split knuckle as if it were a lesson etched into skin. The workshop smelled of rust and oil, a place where broken things went to be fixed or discarded. His father's hands were steady, thick with scars that spoke of work and endurance, and when he tightened the bandage he did so with care that almost passed for kindness. "Pain teaches," his father said. "It makes you strong." Elias nodded because nodding was safer than asking why strength always seemed to hurt. By the time he was 12, the lie had grown roots. Pain did teach, but not what they claimed. It taught him silence. It taught him how to stand very still while the world pressed its thumb into his chest and waited to see what would crack. The town of Black Hollow believed in simple truths. Children were either good or bad. Men were either useful or worthless. Monsters, when they appeared in stories told late at night, were born wrong, crooked from the start, with darkness in their blood. That belief made people comfortable. It meant the line between us and them was clean. Elias lived on the wrong side of most lines. His mother had vanished when he was 8, leaving behind a house that felt hollowed out, like a rib cage without a heart. No one said her name after that. In Black Hollow, absence was treated like a contagious disease. Best ignored, never examined too closely. At school, the other children sensed something off about him the way dogs sense storms. He didn't cry when he fell. He didn't laugh at the right moments. He watched instead, quiet, measuring, cataloging weaknesses not because he wanted to hurt anyone but because knowing felt like control. Control was safety. "Creep," they whispered when they thought he couldn't hear. He always could. The first time Elias realized the town might be afraid of him was the winter the Miller boy went missing. Search parties combed the woods with lanterns, their yellow light trembling against the trees. Elias stood at the edge of the crowd, snow soaking through his boots, listening to the murmurs shift as eyes turned toward him. Too many, too suddenly. "He's strange," someone said. "Always staring. Doesn't talk much." Strange had weight. It bent the air around him. The Miller boy was found 3 days later, alive and frozen half to death, having wandered farther than he meant to. Relief washed over Black Hollow like absolution, but something remained lodged behind the eyes that followed Elias home. Suspicion, once planted, never needed proof to grow. That night, his father drank more than usual. The bottle hit the table hard enough to make Elias flinch. "You keep your head down," his father growled. "People are looking for something to blame." Elias wanted to ask why blame always needed a face like his. He wanted to ask why no one ever looked at the quiet cruelty woven into their own lives, the way they sharpened words into weapons and called it discipline, tradition, love. Instead he nodded. Years passed like that, quiet, compressed, dense with unspoken things. Elias grew tall, his body stretching into angles that made people uneasy. His father's lessons became harsher, framed as preparation for a world that would eat him alive if he didn't learn to endure. Pain teaches, remember? At 16, Elias learned a second lie, that monsters were obvious. The night it shattered was humid, the air thick with thunder that never quite arrived. He was walking home from the river when he heard shouting near the old grain silos. Voices, angry, drunk, righteous. He recognized the boy they had cornered. Thomas Reed. Smaller than Elias, softer. A boy who flinched too easily, who cried when mocked. A boy Black Hollow had quietly decided was weak. Elias stopped at the edge of the light. "Thought you could sneak off, did you?" someone jeered. "Bet he's hiding something." Freak. The word landed like a match. Elias felt something move inside him. Not rage, not exactly. Recognition. A mirror held up too close. He could walk away. He knew that. He had practiced walking away his whole life. Survival was, after all, a discipline. Instead he stepped forward. "Leave him alone." The words sounded strange in his mouth, heavy and unused. The boys turned, surprise flickering into grins. "Well, look who's talking," one said. Black Hollow's little ghost. They laughed. Thomas sobbed. Something snapped, not loud, not dramatic, but clean. Like a bone breaking under just enough pressure. Elias didn't remember deciding to move. He only remembered hands grabbing him, fists swinging, the taste of blood and copper. He remembered how easy it was to hurt them once he stopped holding back. How their confidence collapsed the moment fear entered the equation. When it was over, 2 boys lay groaning in the dirt. The others ran. Thomas stared at Elias as if he were something risen from the ground. "Thank you," he whispered. Elias didn't answer. His hands were shaking, not with guilt but with a terrible clarity. So this was what they meant by monsters. Not creatures born wrong, but people shaped by neglect, sharpened by cruelty, unleashed when silence became unbearable. The town's response was swift. By morning the story had changed. Elias hadn't defended anyone. He had attacked. He had always been violent, they said. Always had that look. His father didn't defend him. "I tried to make you strong," he said, voice heavy with disappointment. "But some things are broken from the start." That night, Elias packed what little he owned. He stood in the doorway of the only home he had known and felt nothing resembling loss. Just relief. And something darker, coiled and patient. As he left Black Hollow, thunder finally broke overhead, rain washing the streets clean of footprints. The town would sleep easier telling itself the monster was gone. Medusa before the curse. Before the word monster ever found her name, Medusa was known for stillness. She learned it as a girl, standing knee-deep in the sea beside her sisters, Stheno and Euryale, letting the water move around her while she remained quiet as a held breath. The ocean liked Medusa best. It curled gently at her ankles, traced her calves with foamy fingers, and mirrored the sky in her eyes. Where her sisters laughed and raced the tide, Medusa listened, to the language of waves breaking themselves into syllables, to the secret groan of the earth beneath the salt. She was mortal, though the world often forgot it. People came from distant villages to glimpse the 3 sisters walking the cliffs. They whispered that the Gorgons were daughters of ancient powers, that they were half sea, half storm. They were not wrong exactly, but Medusa alone carried the weight of ending. She would age. She would die. The knowledge sat inside her like a quiet stone, neither bitter nor sweet, just there. Her beauty, too, was spoken of as if it were a gift from the gods, but Medusa had never asked for it. It followed her like a shadow cast by other people's eyes. Dark hair, thick and gleaming, spilled down her back in waves that rivaled the sea itself. Her face, soft lines, wide mouth, gaze too earnest to be cunning, seemed to invite confession. Strangers told her their griefs without knowing why. Children reached for her hands without fear. Only later would she understand how dangerous that kind of openness could be. The temple of Athena rose pale and precise above the shore, all marble order against the wildness of sand and surf. Medusa first entered it as a girl, her feet bare and salted, her hair braided by her sister's impatient fingers. Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, was not a gentle deity, but she was a fair one, or so Medusa believed. The temple smelled of oil and clean stone, of discipline and clarity. Here everything had a place. Here chaos bowed its head. Medusa became a priestess not out of ambition but relief. In service, her beauty was less hers to manage. Her days filled with ritual, sweeping the floors at dawn, polishing bronze shields that reflected the world in careful curves, tending the olive branches that Athena favored. She learned the hymns until they lived in her bones. When she spoke them, her voice did not tremble. When she prayed, she felt seen, not admired, not desired, but recognized. Athena's presence was cool and distant, like the moment just before rain. Medusa felt it most strongly when she stood alone in the inner chamber, hands resting on the altar, heart steady. In those moments, she believed wisdom was something that could be learned, step by step, like walking a narrow path. Outside the temple, the world continued its rough music. Sailors docked their ships and left offerings, their eyes lingering too long. Kings sent emissaries bearing gold, hoping for favor from the goddess, hoping also to glimpse the famous priestess. Medusa learned to lower her gaze without shrinking, to speak without inviting intimacy. It was a careful dance, one she practiced daily. Sometimes Poseidon came. The sea god did not enter the temple at first. He lingered at the edge of the waves, vast and restless, a presence that made the horizon feel too small. Medusa felt him before she saw him, the way one senses a storm forming beyond sight. When he finally approached, the water rose to greet him and the air thickened with salt. "You belong to both worlds," he told her once, his voice like undertow. "Stone and sea." Medusa did not know how to answer. She was taught that God spoke truths humans could not refuse, only misunderstand. She prayed harder after that. Her sisters visited when they could, immortal laughter echoing against the temple walls. They teased her for her seriousness, for her careful hands and quiet devotion. "You are too gentle for gods," Stheno said, pressing a kiss to Medusa's hair. "They break what bends." Medusa smiled because it was easier than arguing. In the days before the curse, there were small joys she would later cling to in memory: the feel of cool marble under her palms at dawn, the way olive leaves whispered secrets when the wind passed through them, the moment a frightened child smiled at her and believed the world could be kind. She did not know she was standing at the edge of a story already written by others. When the violation came, swift, overwhelming, sanctified by power, it shattered not only her body but the logic she had built her life upon. The temple that had promised order became a witness that did not speak. The goddess who valued justice weighed silence more heavily than truth. But that belongs to the next telling. Before the curse, Medusa was not rage incarnate or vengeance made flesh. She was a woman who believed in balance. She was a priestess who trusted the gods to see clearly. She was a sister who loved the sea and listened more than she spoke. The Immortal Sisters and the nature of guardianship. The Immortal Sisters were not born as others were born, nor were they made in any single moment of divine will. They emerged instead at the long hinge of ages, when the world first learned that time could wound as deeply as any blade. In those early eras, the lands were raw and unfinished, the seas restless and the skies unaccustomed to silence. It was then that the sisters awoke, three consciousnesses braided together by purpose, yet distinct in temperament, each embodying a different answer to the same ancient question: how is a fragile world to be guarded without being ruled? They are called immortal not because they cannot be destroyed, but because they do not age toward irrelevance. Change passes through them without erasing them. Kingdoms rise, fracture, and are ground into dust. Languages flower and die. Faiths sharpen and dull. The sisters remain, altered in understanding but unbroken in essence. Their immortality is thus not stasis but endurance. The eldest of the sisters is remembered as Aurelian, though her true name has long since lost its consonants. She is the keeper of continuities, the one who remembers not merely events but the meanings that once animated them. Where others see ruins, Aurelian sees intentions unfinished. Her gaze is long and her patience longer still. To her, guardianship is preservation, the careful maintenance of patterns that allow life to recur. She intervenes rarely, and only when a thread essential to the tapestry of the world is about to be severed. The second sister, Valith, stands in contrast. She is the warden of thresholds and her domain is transition, birth and death, peace and war, ignorance and knowledge. Where Aurelian preserves, Valith tests. She believes that a world unchallenged decays from within, becoming brittle and false. Thus, her guardianship is active, sometimes brutal. She closes gates as often as she opens them, and many who curse her name do not realize that they stand alive only because she once barred their enemies from passing fully into the world. The youngest is Ceres, called the Watcher of Hands. She attends not to ages or borders but to individuals. Ceres listens for the quiet choices that history books never record. The decision not to strike, the refusal to betray, the moment of courage that passes unseen. Her form is the most mutable, and she walks among mortals more often than her sisters combined. To Ceres, guardianship is guidance. Never command, never coercion, but the steady offering of possibility. Despite their differences, the sisters are bound by a single covenant, forged before the first crown was worn. They may guard but they may not rule. This law is older than any throne, and more inflexible than iron. The world, they learned early, must be allowed to wound itself, to heal itself, and to learn from its own scars. A guardian who governs ceases to protect. She merely replaces one fragility with another. This distinction is the heart of the sisters' tragedy and their strength. They possess power sufficient to end wars before they begin, to silence tyrants with a word, to reorder the courses of rivers and stars alike. Yet to do so freely would be to rob the world of consequence. Without consequence there can be no growth. only repetition without meaning. Thus, the sisters choose restraint, and restraint is a heavier burden than dominion. Throughout the centuries, scholars have argued whether the sisters truly care for the world or merely observe it as one might observe an intricate game. Such arguments reveal more about the scholars than about the sisters. Care for immortals cannot resemble mortal affection. To love everything equally is to love nothing intensely. To love selectively is to doom oneself to endless grief. The sisters' care is therefore principled rather than emotional. They are loyal to balance, to continuity, and to the capacity of mortals to choose. Guardianship, as practiced by the sisters, operates through limits. They establish boundaries beyond which destruction may not pass. They seed knowledge where ignorance would otherwise become absolute. They ensure that no single will, mortal or otherwise, achieves final, unassailable dominance. Yet within these limits, they permit cruelty, folly, and ambition to unfold. The suffering that results is not ignored, but it is not always prevented. The most controversial aspect of their guardianship is their acceptance of failure. The sisters know that some worlds, some cultures, and some lives will be lost despite their vigilance. To intervene at every point of collapse would be to freeze the world into a single, suffocating perfection. Instead, they allow endings, believing that endings are the soil from which unforeseen beginnings grow. This belief has earned them both reverence and hatred in equal measure. It is said that the sisters convene only when the nature of guardianship itself is threatened, when forces arise that would erase choice, time, or meaning altogether. At such moments, their unity becomes visible and the world trembles. Mountains have knelt during these convergences, oceans have drawn back in fear. Yet even then, their goal is not victory, but restoration of the conditions under which life may once again struggle on its own terms. In understanding the immortal sisters, one must abandon the expectation of salvation. They are not saviors. They are custodians of possibility. Their watch ensures not that the world will be just or kind, but that it will remain a place where justice and kindness are still imaginable. This, they believe, is the purest form of guardianship, and the only one that allows a living world to remain truly alive. Perseus, Heroism, and the Cost of Reframing. In the tapestry of Greek mythology, Perseus emerges as a figure of both extraordinary courage and subtle moral complexity. He is not the muscle-bound warrior who storms temples or slays enemies for personal gain. Rather, he is a hero whose triumphs are mediated by cunning, divine assistance, and an acute awareness of perception. The story of Perseus is, in many ways, a meditation on heroism itself, the delicate interplay between action and consequence, bravery and ethics, and the ways in which reframing a narrative can both elevate and burden a hero. In examining Perseus, one confronts not only the archetypal adventures of myth but also the human impulse to define, and redefine, what it means to be heroic. Perseus' journey begins with an ostensibly straightforward mandate: slay Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze turns men to stone. On the surface, this is a classic hero's quest, a test of bravery and skill. Yet even this simple objective is fraught with moral ambiguity. Medusa, in some versions of the myth, is a victim, cursed by Athena, punished for circumstances beyond her control, her monstrous visage as much a symbol of injustice as of terror. By undertaking her destruction, Perseus embodies the paradox of heroism. The act is celebrated, yet it is fundamentally an act of lethal judgment against a being who may be more wrong than threatening. This paradox complicates our understanding of courage. Perseus' heroism is inseparable from the consequences of reframing. By seeing Medusa as an enemy, he must perform a deed that would otherwise be morally questionable, transforming both the act and its perception into an emblem of valor. Integral to Perseus' success is the ensemble of divine gifts that frame his journey: Hermes' winged sandals, Hades' helm of invisibility, Athena's polished shield, and a magical bag capable of containing the severed Gorgon head. These tools illustrate another dimension of heroism, the collaborative and contingent nature of success. Perseus is not an isolated agent of courage. He is embedded within a network of favors, obligations, and interventions. In this sense, heroism is reframed from an innate personal quality to a relational achievement. By acknowledging the support he receives, Perseus' narrative highlights a fundamental truth often obscured by mythic simplification: no hero operates in a vacuum. Courage is amplified and indeed made possible by the alignment of forces and the capacity to navigate them wisely. The framing of heroism thus involves not only action but also perception. A hero is heroic not merely by deeds performed, but by the narrative lens that organizes those deeds into meaning. The act of slaying Medusa itself demonstrates Perseus' mastery of reframing. Facing a creature whose direct gaze ensures death, Perseus uses the reflective shield to view Medusa indirectly, decoupling perception from immediate danger. In this moment, courage is inseparable from cognition. Heroism is not blind recklessness but an intelligent negotiation of risk, a reframing of challenge through strategy. By perceiving indirectly, Perseus transforms vulnerability into advantage, danger into possibility. The philosophical resonance is clear. Heroism requires the capacity to reconceptualize the circumstances of confrontation, to shift one's viewpoint so that peril can be approached not merely with strength but with insight. Yet even the most celebrated heroes bear the weight of consequences. Perseus' return journey, in which he rescues Andromeda from a sea monster, demonstrates the moral and social complexities of heroic action. Here, his prior success, slaying Medusa, establishes his reputation, but it is also this reputation that facilitates intervention. Andromeda's plight is resolved not solely by Perseus' courage, but by the social recognition that enables him to act decisively. In essence, heroism operates within a network of expectations and perceptions. The act is only heroic because observers interpret it as such. Reputation becomes a currency that permits action, just as much as divine instruments or personal skill. The reframing of Perseus' deeds, from lethal judgment to noble rescue, illustrates the malleability of heroism in the interplay between deed and perception. Heroism is, therefore, both an act and a narrative, each reinforcing the other but neither sufficient alone. However, this reframing is not without cost. Perseus' success reshapes the moral landscape around him, often in ways that extend beyond his intention. The death of Medusa creates the potential for abuse. The Gorgon head is a weapon of immense power, capable of turning allies and enemies alike into stone. By claiming and using this object, Perseus assumes responsibility not only for his actions but for the consequences of their symbolic and literal power. Heroism, in this light, is a burden as much as a glory. To act heroically is to intervene in a world of cascading effects, where the distinction between justice and aggression may blur. Perseus' story thus underscores a profound truth. The narrative of heroism requires moral and psychological negotiation, a readiness to bear the unintended consequences of acts framed as virtuous. Perseus also exemplifies the role of myth in shaping our collective understanding of heroism. Over centuries, his story has been recounted, interpreted, and reframed in ways that emphasize courage, cleverness, or divine favor according to the values of the teller. The process of storytelling itself is a form of reframing. Acts are imbued with moral significance, peril is transmuted into glory, and victims may be overlooked or valorized depending on the cultural lens. In this sense, the hero exists as much in the imagination of the audience as in the narrative itself. Perseus' deeds, and their ethical ambiguity, invite reflection on how societies construct ideals of bravery and leadership. Heroes are as much artifacts of perception as of action. Their stories illuminate the shifting boundaries between valor, violence, and virtue. In Perseus stands as a figure of both extraordinary courage and enduring complexity, a hero whose actions invite admiration and ethical reflection in equal measure. His narrative demonstrates that heroism is not a simple measure of strength or daring but a nuanced interplay of perception, strategy, and consequence. To be heroic is to act decisively while navigating moral ambiguity, to wield power while accepting its repercussions, and to negotiate the delicate relationship between narrative and reality. Perseus' story teaches that the framing of heroism is itself a heroic act. The courage to see clearly, to act wisely, and to bear the weight of interpretation. And yet, this reframing comes at a cost, for the lens through which heroism is perceived shapes not only the hero's legacy but the moral landscape of all who encounter it. In the end, Perseus challenges us to reconsider our own notions of heroism. Reclaiming the Gorgon as guardian. In the vast landscape of myth, few figures have been as persistently misunderstood as the Gorgon. Medusa, the most infamous of her sisters, has long been cast as a monster, a cautionary emblem of terror, and a mirror reflecting the fears of those who would dare to look upon her. Yet to confine her to the role of villain is to ignore the rich symbolism of the Gorgon as a guardian, a sentinel whose power is not merely destructive, but protective, transformative, and deeply rooted in the sacred architecture of myth. The earliest depictions of the Gorgons, particularly in Greek art and poetry, reveal a complexity that modern retellings often erase. In archaic vase paintings, they are not grotesque anomalies but fearsome protectors. Their faces, with wide, staring eyes and serpentine hair, are emblazoned on shields, temples, and doorways, warding off evil and safeguarding those within. In these images, the Gorgon functions less as a threat to humanity and more as a boundary figure. A liminal presence standing between the profane and the sacred, the chaotic and the ordered. To understand the Gorgon as guardian is to reclaim her original liminal role, a figure whose gaze does not merely petrify but purifies, separates, and protects. This protective dimension becomes clearer when we examine the Gorgon in the context of ancient ritual. The placement of Gorgon imagery at temple entrances or on amulets was never incidental. Scholars such as Walter Burkert and Mary Beard have argued that the petrifying gaze attributed to the Gorgon operates symbolically as a form of ritual deterrence. By confronting the chaotic forces of the world, be they human malice or demonic entities, the Gorgon preserves the sanctity of the space she guards. Her power is not arbitrary violence. It is the ultimate expression of defensive sovereignty. The Gorgon does not intrude, she enforces boundaries, reminding all who approach that some thresholds are sacred and inviolable. Yet, over centuries, this protective symbolism was overshadowed by narratives of conquest and victimization, most famously in the myth of Perseus. In the Homeric and later Greek traditions, Perseus' slaying of Medusa becomes a heroic triumph over monstrous femininity. In doing so, the myth reframes the Gorgon as a passive obstacle to male ambition rather than an active guardian. Here, the guardian becomes a relic, a defeated power whose function is erased and appropriated. The serpent-haired protector is reduced to a trophy, and the transformative potency of her gaze is repurposed as a weapon wielded by another. This inversion is critical. The mythic narrative shifts from honoring the Gorgon's agency to celebrating its suppression, a pattern echoed in later cultural receptions of the figure. Reclaiming the Gorgon as guardian requires a reorientation of perspective. We must confront not only the mythology itself but also the cultural assumptions that have long equated female power with monstrosity. In this reclamation, the Gorgon becomes a figure of resilience and autonomy. She embodies the principle that some forces cannot be subdued without consequence, that true guardianship often entails fearsome deterrence, and that protective power may appear threatening to those uninitiated into its logic. Far from a simple monster, the Gorgon is a threshold figure whose role is to preserve the integrity of what she protects. This understanding has profound implications for contemporary interpretations of myth. In literature, art, and popular culture, there is a growing movement to depict the Gorgon not as a passive victim of heroism but as an active agent with purpose and sovereignty. Writers and artists reimagine her gaze not as a tool of destruction alone, but as a form of insight and revelation, a mirror that reflects not only the beholder's fear but their inner truths. In this sense, the Gorgon's power is simultaneously defensive and revelatory, guarding not only physical spaces but the moral and psychological integrity of those who approach her. Archaeological evidence also supports this broader understanding. The Gorgoneion, the stylized Gorgon face used in protective architecture, is often found in conjunction with sacred or politically significant sites. Temples, treasury buildings, and even shields carry her visage as a statement of divine authority and protective force. In this role, the Gorgon functions analogously to other liminal guardians in global mythologies, figures who stand at thresholds to mark boundaries, regulate access, and enforce cosmic or societal order. Her image is a warning: approach with respect or be undone. It is an early testament to the power of symbol as a form of control and protection. Reclaiming the Gorgon also necessitates revisiting her mythic narrative with care. Rather than focusing solely on her death at Perseus' hands, attention must be paid to her enduring potency. Even in death, the Gorgon's head continues to act as a talismanic protector. Perseus' use of her severed head on the shield of Athena is itself a symbolic acknowledgement of her role as guardian. Though the narrative frames it as subjugation, it also demonstrates the recognition that the Gorgon's power cannot be ignored or destroyed entirely. It must be respected, contained, and wisely deployed. In this sense, reclaiming the Gorgon involves reclaiming her functional authority, not merely her moral or aesthetic significance. Finally, the act of reclamation is not purely scholarly, it is ethical and symbolic. To honor the Gorgon as guardian is to challenge narratives that demonize protective female power, that equate fear with immorality, or that reduce agency to passivity. It is a radical gesture of acknowledgement that power, when exercised to maintain balance and protect life, deserves recognition rather than suppression. By reframing Medusa and her sisters as active guardians rather than passive monsters, we recover an essential dimension of myth, a dimension in which fearsome appearances conceal profound responsibility, and in which terror is a tool of preservation rather than oppression. Thus, the Gorgon emerges not as an obstacle to be overcome, but as a sentinel whose gaze asserts the sacredness of thresholds, the integrity of boundaries, and the transformative potential of vigilance. To reclaim the Gorgon as guardian is to embrace a fuller, richer mythology, one in which the monstrous and the protective are not opposed but intertwined. If Medusa was a monster, then why was her image used to protect temples, cities, and gods themselves? And if the Gorgons were guardians, what does that say about the heroes who destroyed them? Myths don't just tell us what ancient people feared, they tell us what they chose to forget. Medusa still stands at the threshold between terror and protection, asking us whether fear is always evil, or sometimes necessary. Thank you for watching and for questioning the stories we inherit. If this changed how you see mythology, consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next legend we uncover.